What up, Naughty Steppers? It's Connor Whitmore here again with another review for you on the Nawtystep channel, the first of 2019, and today's video is a classic review of the debut album from Must Die, released on Owsla, Death and Magic. Seattle-based Lee Bates, also known as Must Die, first announced himself on the dark electronic music scene in 2013, releasing a staggering 8 multi-track projects over the course of that year from January to November, starting off with the Skychild EP and finishing with Fever Dream Part 2, a quick follow-up to Fever Dream Part 1 put out just 2 months earlier. Those last two being his first Never Say Die projects, releasing EPs for the likes of Firepower, Smog and Play Me along the way too. Not forgetting his features on other EPs from the likes of Eptic and Computer Club, providing remixes for producers such as Datsik and Protohype as well. So taking all of that into account, it's frankly crazy that just 10 months after Fever Dream Part 2, Bates came through with his debut full-length LP, Death and Magic, for Skrillex's Owsla label. A year in which, once again, he had a part in several other huge projects, most notably Firepower's Shell Shock Volume 2 compilation and Zomboy's own debut album, Outbreak. So quite how he managed to produce an entire album, considering how busy his first year and a half in the bass limelight was, is still completely baffling to me and always will be. More so because not only did he achieve this feat in amidst everything else that was going on, but he executed it with exceptional aplomb on many fronts. Music directly from the dark electronic music scene that was as varied an album as anyone had heard before, from a predominantly dubstep artist. Of course, earlier that year, the bass world had been wowed by Skrillex's debut album Recess, which itself was a very diverse project, and surprisingly so. But when it came to a producer sticking strictly to their dark roots, Must Die's variation in production became arguably more appealing than Skrillex's in that album format. Many even felt Bates filled a void that had been left by Skrillex ever since the latter stopped producing songs similar to First of the Year and Scary Monsters and Nice Sprites, for example. Ironic in a way, therefore, that Bates released his album on Owsla, but telling also in a sense of Skrillex almost passing on the baton as he looked to try out new things himself. 10 tracks here covering near everything you could imagine, from BROSTEP to trap, house, electro, rave, drumstep, even elements of hip-hop in there, with the September 30th release, of course, arriving after Skrillex's Recess, but also just after the other aforementioned album, Zomboy's Outbreak. Death and Magic making itself available as the album that combined those two approaches, the experimentalism of Skrillex and the outright savagery of Zomboy. A project that, in bringing together that willingness to try new things and his own brutal dubstep approach, showed the true evolution of his style and music. One in which Bates warned us before its release to expect the unexpected, and it certainly lived up to that warning. The aspect of it that was most likely to ward off those who had grown accustomed to his usual style. However, because there are so many infectious ideas on display here, and because it's all so well constructed and assembled, there was little stopping it from being an instant hit. I think of tracks like Together, for example, a seriously punchy, crisp, slow tempo, trap, dub, hybrid sort of number, which has those extremely catchy vocal notes cascading over the track, and that ridiculously fine, punctuated percussion to support it. The smooth bop and rhythm to this track, in juxtaposition with the twinkly, glacial theme that runs through it, being another fantastic aspect of it. Similarly toned down within the context of this album, we have tracks 5 and 10, Imprint and Star Throne respectively. Again, experimental tracks for Must Die, with very identifiable moments throughout, with everything conjoined so efficiently and tidily. In the former imprint, we have the catchiest vocal on the LP from TK Maitza, her playful articulation dancing perfectly over the beat. An instrumental that effortlessly lures you in, again trap-based, dark, groovy and bouncy. Proper naughty vibe to this one, and very difficult not to move along to. And then Star Throne, the intergalactic landing on another planet main melody of which gives that much needed sense of journey and finality at the album's close. It's the drops here that are most interesting though, spacious, clattering wooden sounds that are pleasantly reticent, great moments of isolation here with a real respect for timing. Switching things up slightly on the experimental front, we have Filter System, a lovely, swooshing, frisky, jungle terror-esque sort of tune. Very neat and intricate, like an insect crawling frantically over your body. Really amazing mix of Amazonian sounds. Energy and detail are off the chart. But the undoubted outright banger on Death and Magic, and a definite experiment from Bates, would have to be track 7, Hellcat. A completely full-throttle rave electro track that doesn't let up from start to finish, hitting you with one repeated hit of electrified bass after another. Unforgiving in both tempo and sound, with those piercing chime notes that make up the drops, which is where the sense of development with this track is achieved most. The drums in Hellcat are also the most consistently great of any track on the album. And it's here that I must return to the notion of the album being a definite mix of experimentalism and savage dubstep, because the remaining 5 tracks to discuss here are the latter exactly. The uncontainable, booming, helter-skelter journey that is Zipper alongside Datsik is as spontaneous and free-spirited as we've ever heard from Must Die. An absolute mass of ideas firing at you from all directions, wild and manic, complemented by the full-of-life vocals from the Ragga Twins, who were hot property at that time. Project Ghost is a fantastically voluptuous, juicy, enveloping number that wows through its sound design alone, like being swallowed by a giant worm and vomited back up again. A stream of consciousness kind of song with so many little evolutions and sample interjections laced throughout, the gift on Death and Magic that keeps on giving. The penultimate track, Pay Me, is another with loads going on and is probably my least favourite on the album. However, there are several redeeming factors to it. The second drop switched down to a more staggered beat, and the dreamy version of the intro that we get in the midsection being its most noteworthy parts. And in Feathers, you have arguably the album's most overtly musical track, melancholic yet aspirational, the distant drops swelling and contracting, holding you in this vortex-like trance. Moreover, the jumpy violin breaks in the drops are potentially my favourite moments on the whole album. But the standout dubstep track for me, and many others if we're going by streaming numbers, with a staggering 3.75 million on Spotify alone, is the opener, Gem Shards. I often say something works from beginning to end, but with this track it's not talking generally about the intro, drop, midsection and outro. It's literally to the second. The clockwork opening, the warm, welcoming organ notes, the blissful pre-build sections, the ferocious dubstep. There's so much to it and it all comes together so well. Very organic in its construction to the extent that you can appreciate each sequence individually for what it is, yet still acknowledge the track as a whole with no fuss. By this, I mean that in spite of all these varying sections and the emotional journey it takes you on, you're left admiring it as a single entity rather than the sum of its parts. A very complete song and a perfect introduction to a dark electronic music album, maybe the best we'll ever see come out of the dubstep genre. But fundamentally, with Death and Magic, Bates wanted to translate the element of surprise by showing what he could do beyond dubstep and he certainly did that. The different types of track are evenly spread out so that we never get too much dubstep or too much experimentalism. The track listing of this album is very underrated. It's nigh on perfect. A project that, as I mentioned before, showcases the evolution of Bates' music and style, an incredibly rich and textured one at that. It's with Death and Magic that he really grew as a producer. In his eyes, the full representation of his taste for the demonic and fantasy, getting a real balance between the two and showing us pretty much everything that his sound could offer. Explosive and stunning, magical and hellish, so much to take in here, a level of ambition that's near unparalleled in this scene and simply can't be taken for granted. In the process, through his intense experimentation, wealth of wide-reaching ideas, and exceptional sonic clarity, he singled himself out as a unique producer. On a level of outright bangers, there was no one else with this standard of quality and experimentation across an album in the dark electronic music scene. Lest it be interpreted merely as a collection of bangers, whilst they are all that, it's more a project with a real awareness and sense of direction to it over its course. Completely seizes you from track 1 to 10, even in its more remote, distant moments, gripping instead through the sheer visceral nature of the sounds on show. The builds on these tracks, almost all very preparatory, brooding, daunting, warning of what's to come and evocative, I must say also play a massive part in that. An album I find to be like an onion with infinite layers, so much going on yet the ideas are so coherent and identifiable throughout. Each song with both its inviting and remorseless moments, making the title so fitting and the LP such an enjoyable listen. Previous works had created a platform for him and put him on a pedestal somewhat, but it was this album that almost immediately granted him legend status, I think. Detractors will be quick to say, well, it was only released 4.5 years ago, how could it possibly be a classic already? Well, it's just that varied and high quality, plain and simple, reaching a point of consistent excellence that means it can't be ignored on that front. Indeed, he hadn't been around for that long, but putting out such a statement-making project so early on really enabled him to get the following and plaudits that he has now. Beyond that, Death and Magic is also an immensely nostalgic project for me, having got really stuck into it on its first release in very formative years of my life at 20 years old, which I imagine is the case for many others as well. Why so many still latch on to this album and the Must Die concept generally. Also, of course, with it coming out when it did, at what many would see as the peak of the modern dubstep era in 2014. But yeah, Must Die's debut album is just very distinct, memorable, well put together and extremely varied. It has basically everything you would want from a dark electronic music album. The exact right amount of him, both in his dubstep pomp and also in his experimental element. A thoroughly classy album that will live on in bass music for years and years to come. And so that is that, guys, for another review on the Nawtystep channel, the first of 2019, this time of the debut album from Must Die, released on Owsla, Death and Magic. Thank you very much, and as always, for tuning in. Be sure to leave a comment with your thoughts on Death and Magic. Is this a classic album for you? Which tracks are your favourites from it? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, then be sure to give it a big old thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, hitting the notification bell along the way. Nawtystep is all about coverage of bass music across a wide variety of genres, from EP and album reviews to top 5s and 10s, rave footage, opinion pieces, and more. So again, if that interests you, then consider subscribing. For some other classic reviews on the channel, check out the link next to my head somewhere. If you're not following Nawtystep on social media yet, links to all of those are in the description box down below. And lastly, if it's naughty, then you know guys, so be sure as always to keep it naughty and stay safe. And I shall see all of you legends in the next one. Happy New Year. Peace out.